Supreme Commander Raxal drummed his 4 fingers against the crystalline table, each tap echoing through the grand chamber of the Galactic Council. The annual military recruitment meeting was, as usual, turning into a spectacular display of incompetence. 13 different species had presented their candidates, and each one was more disappointing than the last. "So let me get this straight," Raxal said, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that made junior officers contemplate career changes. "The Zentarians are too busy meditating to fight. The cracks keep eating their combat instructors, and the Velini refuse to wake up before their 3rd sun sets." He paused, letting out a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so close to a growl. "Wonderful. Simply wonderful." General Kith'vara, his second in command, shifted uncomfortably in her hover seat. The bioluminescent patches on her scaled skin flickered with anxiety as she cleared her throat. "Supreme Commander, if I may, there is one species we haven't considered yet." The chamber fell silent. Even the ever-present hum of the quantum processors seemed to quiet down in anticipation. Well, Raxal's secondary eyes narrowed while his primary ones remained fixed on the holographic display. "Don't keep us in suspense, General. My patience, like our military budget, is not infinite." Kith'vara's fingers danced across her datapad, and a new projection materialized in the center of the chamber. A blue-green planet rotated slowly, surrounded by an alarming amount of space debris. "Human," she announced, trying to inject confidence into her voice. "From a planet they call Earth." The assembled council members burst into laughter. A Proxian delegate actually fell out of his gravity chair. Humans, Admiral Vex snorted, his tentacles writhing with amusement. Those primitive bipeds who still think particle physics is advanced science? The ones who made thousands of movies about us invading them before we even knew they existed. Raxal raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent again. "Continue, General. What makes you think these humans are worth our consideration?" "Sir," their Kith'vara paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're different. Their planetary defense force is divided into multiple competing factions, yet they haven't annihilated themselves. They wage war using projectile weapons that would be considered antiques by our standards, but their tactics are unpredictable. And their training methods," she shuddered slightly. "They voluntarily jump out of perfectly functional aircraft, for practice." The Supreme Commander leaned forward, his interest finally peaked. "You're suggesting we recruit a species that intentionally falls from the sky for fun?" "Not just that, sir. They also have these training exercises called marathons where they run until their bodies nearly fail, and something called CrossFit that appears to be some form of voluntary torture." Raxal's membrane-covered eyes blinked in succession. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should take a closer look at these humans. General, assemble a reconnaissance team, but keep it covert. The last thing we need is another species making movies about US. General Kith'vara's reconnaissance team spent 3 standard galactic months observing Earth. And with each passing day, their reports became increasingly concerning. Commander Raxal sat in his private chambers, reviewing the latest findings with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Report Update 47, he read aloud, his voice echoing off the metallic walls. Human subject Madison Brooks completed what they call an ultra-marathon through something called Death Valley. Temperature hot enough to cook a Craxtonian egg. Distance longer than some planetary circumferences. Survival rate somehow not 0. He took a sip of his nutrient solution and moved to the next report. Subject Carlos Rodriguez broke his leg during combat training, cauterized his own wound with heated metal, and continued fighting for another 3 hours. Reason given the team was counting on me." Raxal's secondary heart skipped a beat. The door chimed, and Kith'vara entered, carrying fresh data crystals. "Sir, you need to see this. We've completed our analysis of human warfare history." "Please tell me it's less disturbing than the training reports," Raxal said, knowing full well it wouldn't be. "These humans." Kith'vara began, her scales shifting to a pale blue of disbelief. "They went from primitive projectile weapons to splitting atoms in less than 200 years. They developed powered flight and then walked on their moon within a single human lifetime. But that's not the concerning part. There's a more concerning part. They adapt. Constantly. During something they called World War II, they turned their civilian factories into military production centers in weeks. Their civilians learned to build spacecraft engines and code computers with no prior experience. And sir, she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper, they weaponized their own food supply chain. Raxal's primary eyes widened. Explain. They created something called spam. It's a meat product that never decays. Never. They used it to feed entire armies. Some of their soldiers complained it was worse than dying in battle, but they ate it anyway, and kept fighting. The Supreme Commander pulled up another report on his holoscreen. What about their combat tactics? That's where it gets really strange, sir. They have these elite warriors called Marines who have a saying: improvise, adapt, overcome. We've observed them turning writing implements into weapons, using dental floss to escape restraints, and creating explosive devices from cleaning supplies. One human soldier, Nathan Winters, defended his position using nothing but a broken communication device and something called a spork. Raxal's tentacles curled in distress, and their command structure, flexible to the point of chaos. Their lower-ranked warriors are encouraged to think independently and disobey orders if the situation demands it. They call it showing initiative. Some of their most celebrated military victories came from soldiers completely ignoring their commanding officers. The Supreme Commander stood and paced the room, all four of his arms clasped behind his back. What about their weaknesses? Surely they must have some. Kith'vara consulted her data pad. They require constant hydration, frequent sleep, and something they call coffee. Remove any of these, and they become highly aggressive. But sir, that's the problem. They fight better when they're angry, or tired, or and their response to superior technology. Appropriate it. Quickly. We observed a human child receive a new communication device. Within 3 hours, they had discovered 4 uses the manufacturers hadn't intended and 2 potential security breaches. The child was 8 years old. Raxal sank back into his chair. So what you're telling me is that we're considering recruiting a species that turns everything into a weapon, ignores chain of command, thrives on sleep deprivation, and sees military-grade preservatives as a food group. Yes, sir. And they do it all while making jokes about their own imminent death. They call it gallows humor. Should I show you their internet history? No. Raxal said quickly, I think I've seen enough for one day. Schedule an emergency meeting with the War Council. And Kith'vara, make sure the humans don't notice us leaving. The last thing we need is them figuring out how our cloaking technology works. Despite the concerning reconnaissance reports, the Galactic Council decided to proceed with a trial recruitment program. They selected 5 humans: Alex Chen, a former tech support specialist; Vanessa Rodriguez, an ex-military mechanic; Marcus Thompson, a retired bomb disposal expert; Jackson Blake, a former parkour instructor; and Nina Patel, a chemical engineering student. The selection criteria had been simple: find humans with minimal combat experience to reduce potential threats. In retrospect, Supreme Commander Raxal would later admit this had been their first mistake. Day 1 of human integration has been problematic, Kith'vara reported, her scales now a modeled pattern of stress. We assigned them standard quarters with gravity set to galactic standard. Within 3 hours, Alex Chen had reprogrammed the environmental controls to simulate Earth conditions. When questioned, he said the user interface was, quote, totally not intuitive, and that he was just trying to optimize the user experience. Raxal massaged his temple ridges. Surely that's not the worst of it. No, sir. Vanessa Rodriguez discovered our quantum maintenance bay. She said our tools were, and I quote, cute but inefficient. She then proceeded to rebuild our Mark 7 plasma injector using spare parts and something she calls duct tape. The disturbing part is it works better now. The Supreme Commander's secondary eyes twitched. What about the others? Marcus Thompson was supposed to attend our standard explosive safety lecture. Instead, he ended up teaching the class. Our weapons master is now requesting a transfer. Kith'vara paused to collect herself. Jackson Blake treated our orbital training facility like some sort of playground. He found 17 different ways to breach our secure areas using only the architectural features of the building. He calls it parkour and refuses to use doors like a normal being. And Nina Patel, sir, she looked at our standard issue nutrient packets and declared them an affront to chemistry. She's currently in the lab, attempting to synthesize something called hot sauce using our medical supplies and biological research equipment. 3 security officers are guarding the lab, but they report she's humming something called Eye of the Tiger and shows no signs of stopping. Raxal slumped in his chair. Please tell me they at least followed basic military protocols. About that, sir. When we introduced them to our standard combat simulations, they asked why we didn't include environmental hazards as tactical advantages. Jackson Blake suggested using the simulation room ceiling panels as, quote, totally sweet ambush points. They've started having what they call brainstorming sessions where they compete to find new ways to, as they put it, break the game. And our advanced weapons training. They complained our plasma rifles were too predictable. Alex Chen asked if he could open one up to, quote, see what makes it tick. When we refused, they started a betting pool on who could achieve the highest accuracy rating using the weapons backwards. Nina Patel is currently in the lead. The Supreme Commander stood up and began pacing again. What about the psychological evaluations? Kith'vara's scales shifted to a deep purple of embarrassment. Our chief psychologist has requested early retirement, apparently when asked about their greatest fears. The humans started competing over who had the most interesting phobias. Then they began suggesting ways to overcome them using what they call exposure therapy. Marcus Thompson volunteered to help Nina Patel with her fear of heights by teaching her to base jump from our orbital platform. Base jump? From our please tell me you didn't allow that. No, sir. But they've started a petition. They already have 50 signatures from our own troops who want to try it too. Raxal collapsed back into his chair. So, in less than a week, these 5 humans have reprogrammed our systems, modified our equipment, rewritten our training protocols, and corrupted our troops with their insane ideas. Yes, sir. And sir. There's one more thing. Kith'vara's voice trembled slightly. They've started teaching our cadets something called practical jokes. 3 senior officers have already fallen victim to something called a water bucket door trap. Morale is surprisingly high. High? Our military discipline is crumbling, and morale is high. The troops say the humans make everything more fun, sir. I believe we may have made a tactical error in our selection process. We chose humans with minimal combat experience, thinking they would be easier to control. But it seems that every human is a potential warrior. They just express it differently. Raxal stared out at the stars through his office viewport. Keep them under constant surveillance. And Kith'vara, remove all access to our weapons development facilities. The last thing we need is them discovering our experimental technology division. Too late, sir. Alex Chen already found it. He says our quantum targeting system has, quote, seriously outdated firmware, and he's offered to help us patch it. The Supreme Commander closed all 4 of his eyes. What have we done? The breaking point came during what should have been a standard combat readiness evaluation. Supreme Commander Raxal and General Kith'vara watched from the control room as their 5 human recruits prepared to face the galactic military's most challenging training scenario, the impossible mission. Sir Kith'vara said, her scales now permanently stuck in a stress-modeled pattern. Are you sure about this? No team has ever completed this exercise. It's designed to be unwinnable. Raxal's 4 arms were folded across his chest. Precisely. These humans need to learn their limitations. The scenario will humble them, and we can finally restore some semblance of order to our training program. Down in the simulation chamber, the 5 humans huddled together, examining the holographic briefing. The mission parameters were simple: infiltrate a heavily fortified facility, retrieve classified data, and escape while facing overwhelming odds. The facility was guarded by elite combat drones programmed with 30,000 years of galactic military tactics. They're discussing strategy, Kith'vara reported, monitoring their communications. Wait, they're laughing. Why are they laughing? Alex Chen's voice crackled over the comm system. So, let me get this straight. This is supposed to be impossible to win. Correct, Raxal responded, his voice stern. The exercise demonstrates the importance of accepting unwinnable scenarios with dignity. Cool, Alex replied. Quick question, though, does your simulation account for quantum entanglement paradoxes? Before Raxal could answer, Nina Patel's voice chimed in. Hey, those combat drones run on standard plasma matrices, right? The ones with the thermal regulation systems. In the control room, warning lights began flashing. Sir, a technician reported, someone's accessing the environmental control systems again. Lock them out, Raxal ordered. I'm trying, sir, but they've They've changed all the passwords to something called password 123, and now we're locked out of our own system. The simulation began. On the monitors, they watched as the human team split up. Marcus Thompson and Jackson Blake headed straight for the facility's main entrance, making no attempt at stealth. "What are they doing?" Kith'vara whispered. "The front entrance has the heaviest defenses." Marcus's voice came through, surprisingly cheerful. "Hey Jackson, remember that thing we discussed about maximum entropy in closed systems?" "Oh yeah," Jackson replied. "The chaos theory thing. Nina, you ready with that chemical cocktail you whipped up?" "Ready," Nina's voice sang out from somewhere in the facility's ventilation system. By the way, whoever designed these air ducts clearly never watched action movies. They're perfect for infiltration. Raxal's secondary hearts began palpitating as multiple alarms blared. On the screens, they watched in horror as their perfect simulation descended into absolute chaos. Vanessa Rodriguez had somehow hotwired 3 combat drones and was now leading them in what she called a conga line through the facility's corridors. "These quantum AI protocols are pretty neat," she commented. "But they really should have better firewalls. Also, who wants to bet I can make them dance to the Macarena?" Meanwhile, Alex Chen had found the facility's central computer core. "Okay, so good news and bad news. Good news, I found a way to download the classified data. Bad news, I also found like 17 zero-day exploits in your security system. Want me to write up a patch?" "This is impossible," Raxal muttered, watching as his unbeatable scenario unraveled. "The drones are programmed with every known combat tactic." "That's the problem," Sir Kith'vara replied, her voice faint. "The humans aren't using known tactics. Marcus and Jackson just turned the facility's quantum shield generators into what they're calling a giant bounce house they're using the energy fields for. Are they doing backflips?" "Gravity is more of a suggestion," really, Jackson called out, bouncing off a force field to drop-kick a drone. "Sir," another technician shouted. "The facility's environmental systems are going haywire. Temperatures fluctuating wildly, and sir, the drones are overheating." Nina's voice came through, filled with academic enthusiasm. "Fun fact, if you adjust the humidity and temperature just right, while introducing a catalytic compound I made from the cafeteria's leftover dessert and some cleaning supplies, you can cause a really interesting reaction in plasma-based systems." The drones began shutting down, their sophisticated AI cores unable to cope with conditions that shouldn't have been possible within the simulation's parameters. "They're supposed to be unstoppable," Raxal shouted. "Technically," Marcus replied, sounding like he was giving a lecture, "nothing's unstoppable if you apply enough creative problem-solving. Also, did you know that if you reverse the polarity on these quantum force fields, they make excellent trampolines?" The simulation ended with all 5 humans gathered in the central control room, classified data retrieved, facility in chaos, and not a single shot fired from their weapons. They were high-fiving each other, while Vanessa's reprogrammed drones performed a synchronized dance routine. "Mission complete," Alex announced. "We even found time to optimize your system's processing speed. It was running way below capacity. Oh, and we left you some suggestions for improvement. About 300 of them." Nina wrote them up while she was crawling through the vents. Supreme Commander Raxal stared at the screens, all 4 of his eyes wide with horror. "General Kith'vara." "Yes, sir. Schedule an emergency council meeting." Now, the emergency council meeting convened in what was left of the Grand Chamber. They had to relocate after Nina Patel's latest chemical experiment left their usual meeting room smelling like something called bacon, which was apparently making the vegan ambassador uncomfortable. Supreme Commander Raxal stood before the assembled council, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the visible twitch in his left secondary eye. "Members of the council, after extensive analysis of our human recruits, I must present our findings. General Kith'vara, please begin the briefing." Kith'vara stepped forward, clutching her data pad like a lifeline. "Distinguished council members, our psychological evaluation of humans has revealed several disturbing traits. First, they appear to have no concept of impossible. When faced with insurmountable odds, they become what they call creative." She pulled up a holographic display showing various incident reports. Take Alex Chen's file. When told our quantum computers were unhackable, he took it as a personal challenge. He didn't just hack them, he optimized them. He left a note saying, and I quote, "Your encryption was giving me second-hand embarrassment." What about their combat capabilities? Admiral Vex demanded, his tentacles still bandaged from an unfortunate encounter with Jackson Blake's parkour training program. That's the second disturbing trait, Kith'vara continued. They turn everything into a weapon. Everything. Vanessa Rodriguez weaponized our cleaning drones. She calls them her robo-buddies now. They follow her around and play something called dubstep when she enters a room. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Kith'vara pulled up more data. Marcus Thompson's psychological profile is particularly concerning. When faced with a high-stress situation, he becomes calmer. He says it's because, quote, everything moves in slow motion when things go boom. And their adaptability, Raxal prompted, trying to keep his voice steady. Beyond anything we've encountered. Nina Patel has already learned our entire periodic table, complained about its inefficiency, and proposed several new elements she'd like to, quote, cook up in the lab for fun. We had to revoke her access to the molecular synthesizer after she tried to create something called super coffee. A junior analyst burst into the chamber, looking frantic. General, the humans have started something they call a hackathon with our junior engineers. They're rewriting our base security protocols for fun. They're calling it team building. Raxal's membrane-covered eyes closed in resignation. Continue with the psychological assessment, General. The most alarming discovery is their response to failure. They don't accept it. They call it feedback or learning experience. Jackson Blake failed our zero-gravity combat course 6 times. Instead of giving up, he invented a new fighting style he calls space parkour. Half our special forces units are now requesting training in it. The council chamber erupted in worried murmurs. Kith'vara pressed on, her scales shifting to the deep blue of existential dread. But perhaps most terrifying is their ability to spread chaos. They're inspiring our troops. This morning I caught an entire squadron of elite guards trying to modify their plasma rifles with something called RGB lighting, because apparently it makes them look, quote, totally sick. What are your conclusions? General Raxal asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Sir, the humans aren't just adapting to our technology and tactics. They're improving them, often in ways we never considered. They view our most secure systems as puzzles to be solved, our most lethal weapons as toys to be tinkered with, and our most impossible challenges as, quote, fun weekend projects. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. And they're teaching our people to think the same way. Yesterday, a Zentarian meditation master asked Nina Patel about something called energy drinks. The cracks are now demanding cooking lessons. 3 Valini requested alarm clocks. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Their perfect, orderly military structure was being transformed by 5 humans who seemed to view the laws of physics as mere suggestions and military protocols as interesting starting points for brainstorming sessions. There's one more thing, Kith'vara added reluctantly. They've started a social media group for the entire base. They're calling it Space Force the Real Deal. They already have 10,000 followers. And something called memes are spreading through our communications networks faster than our viral protection can contain them. Supreme Commander Raxal stood before the Galactic Council for the final time regarding the Human Recruitment Initiative. The chamber was unusually quiet, save for the faint bass line of dubstep music drifting up from the reprogrammed security drones 3 floors below. Honored council members, he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who hadn't slept in several cycles. I propose an immediate termination of the human recruitment program and classification of Earth as a level 10 restricted zone. No one objected. Several members nodded vigorously, particularly those who had witnessed the humans' last team-building exercise. Furthermore, Raxal continued, I recommend classifying humans as a potentially hazardous species, not because they're hostile, but because he struggled to find the right words, too helpful. General Kith'vara stepped forward, her scales now permanently locked in a pattern that mental health professionals had dubbed post-human stress coloration. This morning alone, Alex Chen submitted 947 improvements to our quantum computing systems. Nina Patel synthesized a new form of energy drink that temporarily gives users the ability to see in 5 dimensions. Vanessa Rodriguez taught our maintenance AI to sing something called Sweet Caroline. And now we can't make it stop. What about the others? Someone asked nervously. Marcus Thompson and Jackson Blake started a betting pool on who could reach the planet's surface from orbit using only standard-issue equipment. They already have 300 participants, including 2 council members. She glanced pointedly at certain seats, whose occupants suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Raxal raised all 4 arms for silence. The humans have been informed of our decision. They took it surprisingly well. Too well. Alex Chen just smiled and said something about it's probably for the best while doing something suspicious with his data pad. Sir, a junior officer interrupted, bursting into the chamber. We've just detected unauthorized access to our network from Earth. Someone's downloading our entire technical database. The source code says it's from something called HTML for Dummies. The council erupted in panic. Raxal simply sank into his chair, unsurprised. Let me guess, they also left a message. The officer nodded. Just one line, thanks for the internship. P.S. We fixed your coffee machines to make actual coffee. You're welcome. Motion to classify humans as potentially hazardous and restrict all contact, Raxal asked wearily. The vote was unanimous. As the council members filed out, Kith'vara approached her commander. Sir, should we be worried that they seemed so accepting of their dismissal? Raxal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. General, I have a feeling that was exactly what they wanted all along. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make sure they haven't taught our battle cruisers to dance before they leave. In the background, another alarm started blaring. Someone had programmed all the emergency systems to play something called the final countdown.